All right, guess we're live. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending today's session. My name is Brett Purdy, and I'm the Executive Director for Environmental Innovation at Alberta Innovates, and a former Director of the Water Innovation Program. This is our third webinar in the Water Connect series, and Vicki, our current Program Director, who's hosted a few sessions already, has decided things are going smooth enough that she can chance having me host today's events, and I'm looking forward to it. So before we begin, let's just cover a few technology/housekeeping items. So at the bottom of your screen, if you haven't used this interface before, are a few tools that you can use. All of these tools are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most of your desktop and just test the system out a bit. So you can expand your slide area in particular and maximize it to full screen by clicking the arrows up in the corner, and then you can resize and minimize as well. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A tool. We will try to answer as many as we can at the end of the webcast. There's a group chat box. It's a useful tool to connect with other participants, and I'd encourage you to use it during the presentation, but don't let it certainly distract you from the presentation itself. And a reminder that the group chat box is not where to put the questions for the presenters. That's the Q&A tool. If you have any technical issues, you can find some answers located in the help tool at the bottom of your screen. So with that, I would like to welcome you to the Alberta Innovates Water Innovation Connect series. Today's technology development from concept to commercialization session. The technology development is a journey from ideation to proof of concept to pilots to demonstration to commercial deployment. Later stages of commercialization are often the hardest, but they can be enabled by having the right partners and end users in place to help you pull the technology to market. Today, you'll hear from three speakers: Howie Honeyman with Forward Water Technologies, Greg Piorkowski with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry, and Zach Young from H2 Nano. Their bios are available in the engagement tools. In short, we've asked today's presenters to not just tell us a story about their technology and the cool things that it can do, but to tell us a story of the journey to making that technology become real. For those of you not familiar, Alberta Innovates is a provincial corporation created to support research and innovation. We provide funding programs, advice, connections, technical expertise, and applied research services. Our scope encompasses the whole innovation journey, from generation of ideas through applied testing and validation to commercialization and end use. The Water Innovation Connect series will share ideas and outcomes from projects funded in our Alberta Innovates Water Innovation Program. So this program is designed to help achieve the goals for Alberta's Water for Life strategy and the Alberta Water Research and Innovation strategy. The knowledge and technology developed in the program will help to create a clean tech industry in water treatment, to support improvement in water use, conservation, efficiency, and productivity, and to provide safe, secure drinking water and reliable water resources for a growing population while maintaining and not forgetting about the health of aquatic ecosystems. So I hope the series will provide you with some valuable information and to spark discussion. So now let's get started. So I'd like to pass it over and introduce our first speaker, Howie Honeyman. And Howie will be speaking on his project, Forward Water Technologies, Field Pilot Unit, Design, Build, and Test. So Howie, take it over.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much for the introduction, Brett. I appreciate the opportunity to come and provide a presentation for your audience. And I certainly thank the audience for taking the time out to listen to what we have to say. So yeah, I'm the CEO of Forward Water Technologies, and we're developing a new type of technology that can address wastewater and wastewater reuse. It's being driven by what we see as a global demand for improved water technologies. There's a lot of regulation that is growing around water reuse, water control, water regulations are continue to increase. And you know, the consultants out there will tell you that they see a massive market growth for, in specifically industrial desalination technologies, and that's all tied into the water restrictions. So what we're doing is trying to address that, and significantly different from seawater desalination, this is industrially contaminated wastewater. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the large amount of wastewater that's produced, and Typically in Ontario, you see 2 billion liters of industrial hazardous waste generated on an annual basis as one figure of merit. And that's typically disposed of now by deep well injection or direct incineration or evaporation, both of which are really expensive and energy intensive. And our technology is going to compress that overall waste volume, sending a much smaller volume for final disposal, thereby saving a lot of cash, a lot of cost out of the process, and return the vast majority of the water back as fresh, clean, reusable water, and even potable water if it's required. How this plays out is if you have a large on-site facility that's producing, say, 2,000 cubic meters per day of wastewater per whatever time interval, that's disposal cost of about $80. If we put our technology on the same site and reduce the volume by 50%, which is fairly conservative for us, we're going to half the disposal cost, which is typically thrown away or disposed of by volume. And the net savings we're going to see is going to be somewhere in the order of $70,000 a day or $20 million a year for a large on-site facility. And we also see capital payback within the 3-year window, which is also an industry metric. So that's how we're going to roll the business out in terms of its value model. And why can we do that? Well, we're developing a technology that's sitting in a sweet spot for treatment capabilities. You've got reverse osmosis, which is very low-cost treatment options. However, it can only treat salt levels or waste levels to a certain point. Beyond that, it becomes inefficient. The only other options that are out there for these higher waste streams, higher total dissolved salt waste streams, are thermal methods, distillation, evaporation, and even crystallization, and in some cases, even incineration. And we sit right in that sweet spot. We use a membrane technology that allows us to be low cost, and we compete with the thermal technologies that are out there today. How does it work? Just so everybody has a little bit of an understanding there. We take feed wastewater. So this is high total dissolved salt wastewater. This is 5% or higher waste stream, salt-containing waste. We put that in contact with the membrane, and that membrane is selective, only allowing water to cross through that membrane. And the reason why it does that is because on the opposite side of the membrane, or the draw side of the membrane, we have a high salt content proprietary draw solute that creates such a high salt concentration, over 70% by weight salt, that it creates an osmotic potential to pull that water right across the membrane. So we've got no applied pressure, but we're extracting the water through the membrane. Ultimately, once that solution is exhausted and has reduced the volume of the feed water, the feed water goes off for final disposal, and that now diluted draw solution gets processed by a little bit of heat being pumped into it. That causes our proprietary draw solute to turn into two gases, and they simply bubble out of the now clean water, leaving behind water that can be sent straight for reuse. And we go back and we capture those evolving gases, reconcentrate them in a second step, and reuse them in the front end of the process. So what have we done? We've extracted water from dirty water using a low energy process. We've done it using a chemical-driven osmotic pressure that uses chemistry that can be recycled over and over again. So it's closed loop. So we've got a low energy process using essentially off-the-shelf materials and equipment, and it's all done in a closed loop process. So we think this is going to lead into a very economical process for treating high strength wastewater. So the typical journey, as was pointed out, is one that we took. In 2015, we were in the lab. We evolved that into what we call an engineering skid that we're capable of treating about 1,000 liters a day. And then we moved to a field trial, which is what this story is really about. And what we're trying to do is create a situation now where a first buy decision can be made by industry, where they are purchasing products or services, and these will be large capital purchases on a relative basis. But what we're selling to is what I've discovered is a skeptical engineering community, not because they're, not willing to look at this stuff, but because they've been taken, they've been shown so many examples of wastewater treatment that would solve the problem. So they're very skeptical, and they want to see things work at scale. They want to make sure that it's cost efficient, and then operational management is low. And the other thing that we've discovered that you need to have involved is a willing executive and strategic management team to get to that sale. So our goal is to move from the lab into a sales mode, and that's where we've journeyed through it to this point. So let's start at the lab. I'm not going to go over the details of this slide, but what we did is we sourced a whole slew of wastewaters, including wastewater from the oil and gas industry and industrial processes, and the technology works. And it's quite remarkable at bench scale, but that's not significant enough. So we moved to the next scale, which is our engineering level of demonstration. These are all scalable processes on a little skid that we built that's in a operational space that we can use. We use this for ongoing applications development. We use it for continued process improvement, but it's also generating revenue for us. So we were able to multi-purpose this piece of equipment. We could show that our technology worked, we could improve it, and we could start generating small amounts of revenue from this technology. But that still wasn't sufficient enough to get us to our sales target or our goal for actually commercializing the product. But it was enough to do a couple of really remarkable demonstrations. One was we took a wastewater from a company called Vopak, whom we're working with. They're a maritime services producer, and all they do is they move liquids offshore, onto ship, off ship, back onto shore. But in doing that, those large tanks that they have in their ports have to hold multiple liquids. Because they hold multiple liquids, they have to be washed out. Because they get washed out, they create an amazing amount of wastewater. In fact, this particular company generates 34 million cubic meters of waste a year. So we took some of their waste. We took 420 kilograms of their waste in a barrel, and reduced that to what you see in that bottle, which is about 3.2 kilograms of final waste. The balance, the 417 kilos, was clean water that could be sewered, could be reused in industrial processes, or could be released on the surface. So we're quite pleased with that. Made a great example, again, using our engineering skid. We also took some pharmaceutical wastewater, which, if people don't know, in producing pharmaceutical products, the final pills, you produce a wastewater from washing down equipment. That water is only 1% to 2% waste salt, but all of the producers send it for incineration because of the liabilities associated with that wastewater. So you're taking something that's essentially 98% water and you are burning it. There is an incredible cost, and there's a huge greenhouse gas implication on that. So we took, in another example, we took some pharmaceutical wastewater, we reduced the volume by 95%. We were able to show through really detailed analytical methods that the the recovered water had none of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, and we were really quite pleased. But again, we haven't done this at scale. We haven't done this large enough. We have to show that it works at full scale. And that's where our project with Alberta Innovates came in, also with SDTC. And what we did is we designed a large commercial volume scale field pilot unit that would be able to treat up to 15,000 liters a day, and show that the process was not only scalable, but met all of our goals in terms of energy consumption, operational needs, and the like. So we completed those trials in the summer of 2019. And fortunately, as you can see, on this slide, we took the feed wastewater, located on the left-hand side of the screen. We split that into two parts. 70% of the volume was as free, clean water that could be sent for discharge, and then a final concentrate that would go for final disposal. And this is using real industrial waste streams sourced from oil and gas operations in Alberta. So in doing that, we met all of our technical goals as well. We were able to show that we processed the right volume. The volume reduction met or exceeded our expectations at 70%. So 70% of the volume was reclaimed as clean water. Our energy demands to run this process were in line with our predictions, in fact, a little bit better. And the wastewater was clean enough so we could send it down a sewer if we had the appropriate licenses for the site, which we did. But in order to minimize risk, we didn't actually do that. But we could, and that would be the next step, is securing those licenses. And we can see we compare very nicely against traditional evaporation or a competitive technology that's out there that we're aware of called Oasis water technology. So we've massively reduced the technology risk. We've shown that the operational approach is solid, and we've shown we can operate at a commercial scale. Should be easy for the next step. Unfortunately, we're still working through that, and that's where we are today. We're still addressing the skeptical engineering community around this technology. And again, it's not that they're not willing, it's just that they need to have confidence that when they make this capital purchase, it is going to perform as they require it. But we have shown scalability, and we do have some emphasis or demonstration on the equipment and operational costs. And we're working with lower risk business models for them. And that's something else that we've introduced. So instead of simply selling them capital equipment and allowing them to operate it and take the benefit thereof, to reduce their capital risk, we've started looking at business models called build, own, operate, where we build the capital, we take the risk on the capital, and then we provide a service on a volume basis for the end user. And so that's something else that we've learned to do to address the saleability of the technology. But if you're an operational manager and you're working and you're hitting your targets and your goals, are you going to adopt a new technology? Not necessarily. So that's why we've also learned that not only do we have to have better business models, show that the technology can work to sell it to the engineering community, but we have to work with companies that have a willing management to take these risks and see the benefits on both a sustainability and a cost perspective. And so we're working to identify companies that have that type of willingness as well as the engineering interest. So the remaining barriers that we have for ongoing sales is we need longer-term operational data. So that's something else we're learning. A simple summertime pilot simply didn't provide enough depth for that, although it was very useful and allowed us to get a lot more open doors in terms of what we had prior to that. And we're looking for a first user buyer, because once the first buyer makes that decision, I think we're going to be able to say that we've got commercial reality, and that's going to allow us to go to the next step. Just want to look back at the project a little bit. So that's where we are as a company right now. And I think we've demonstrated the technology is fairly feasible. It does work. And we are identifying those types of companies that are allowing us to get to the next step. In reflection, if I look back on the project, you tend to get very focused, very head down, nail the project. We're pretty happy with the results. It worked out very nicely. We've built some relationships because of that. But I think what we could have done better is we could have imagined using the residual assets as a tool to continue to develop the business. And I don't think we did a good enough job in doing that. And that's something that if anybody's looking at these types of funding programs, working through this type of pathway, that I think I would reflect and perhaps make sure you have a good plan for that equipment. That's really all I have to say on our journey. I'd really like to point out that we've had some fantastic supporters, not the least of which is Alberta Innovates and SDTC, who helped us with the field demonstration program. Been fantastic supporters here in the country, and I'd just like to thank everybody for their attention and time. Brett, you might be on mute.
Hello, everyone. I guess we'll just transition. Might have some technical challenges with Brett there, so I'll just take over. Is everyone still with me?
Yeah, Greg,
so,
we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Now for something completely different. So we're going to transition from a very industrial process to an agricultural setting. So what I've been working on with the team here particularly with Sean Zhu, who's technically the PI on the project, but he's currently on parental leave, so I'm taking over for him. But what we've been studying is looking at advancing denitrifying bioreactors to manage agricultural drainage waters in Alberta. And we've been working in this area for quite some time and looking at the impacts of drainage and how we can go about managing it. Bioreactors being one of the later methods that we've been looking at. So when we have excess water in fields or various types of drainage, it can be either uncontrolled or controlled. So with uncontrolled is generally we consider as runoff, so precipitation in excess of the soil being able to hold it, comes off the fields and enters waterways that way. With controlled drainage, we have two types. So there's surface drainage, which is effectively just a ditch that directs water from the field to either another ditch or some sort of drainage path or creek. And there's also subsurface drainage, which are tile drains installed into the soil. And the purpose of those controlled drainage is really just to improve the land for cropping production by reducing the amount of water in the soil. But on the flip side, that water that comes off the land can carry with it sediment and nutrients and agrochemicals as well, and end up into our waterways. So over the past couple of years, we've been looking at passive drainage water treatment systems. So by passive, I just mean that there's no pumping or anything of the water. Water flows according to its gradient through the material and gets cleaned up. So one thing that we've been looking at, phosphorus structures, and also, which is the topic of this particular project and this presentation, is bioreactors. So much of the research in the literature for these two methods have come from the Midwestern U.S. And they've come up with some guidance. This diagram here really shows conceptually shows what a bioreactor is. So effectively, we just divert some of the drainage from, in this case, subsurface drain into basically a trench filled with organic material, a high carbon organic material. And then while the water goes through that material, the nitrate gets converted through denitrification from nitrate to nitrogen gas. And that's how it gets removed. And then the clean water then goes to a receiving system. So a lot of that research is done in Midwestern US, but it's not a local problem to them. It's also a problem for us with drainage impacts to our waterways. So I'm just going to go over a very brief case study in the Tabor Irrigation District. So this is in southern Alberta. There's been a lot of uptake of subsurface drainage in that area just to help improve crop production and limit the effect of flooding or excess water in the rooting zone. So in this particular lateral, which is kind of a return system for irrigation water, they are receiving about 24 tile drains into that system. So we did a little short study just to look at the impact of that drainage onto the water quality in that receiving area. So by sampling from the inlet to the outlet point, we did see a noticeable rise in nitrogen, particularly nitrate in that system, because nitrate is a very mobile form of nitrogen, and to some extent a slight rise in dissolved phosphorus as well. So from there, we worked with the Tabor Irrigation District to install a bioreactor as a proof of concept. So what that looked like was having to divert the tile drain from directly into the canal and then through a bioreactor. And this middle picture really shows what the concept is, right? So you have your line coming in. It's effectively just a trench filled with organic material. So it's a very low-tech system, but by design, just because of the application for being in a edge of field type management practice. So once you fill it with the organic material, then you cap it with soil to help odor control and limit the amount of oxygen going into it. And then what we observed with this demonstration project was that we can remove up to 90% of dissolved nitrogen through these types of systems. So for all intents and purposes, they look pretty good. So, but I guess the question is, why do we need to continue studying these things? If there's already guidance in the Midwestern U.S. and we kind of that they work here. So some of the questions that remain unanswered for us to promote this actively within the agricultural sector in Alberta is what the best material to use. So in the Midwestern U.S., they do promote using wood chips as the ideal substrate. But particularly in southern Alberta, wood chips are fairly difficult to procure, just given that it's in the dry grassland area, and we don't want to chop people's shelter belts to fill these things. And also what the ideal design size is. So we're in a much different climate than the Midwestern U.S. We're a lot colder, and a lot of the drainage happens around snowmelt, which is a little bit different than storm flow that they get there. And the one question also is how long agricultural material would last. So if we use agricultural residues in place of wood, how long, what's the lifetime that this material would last, and how often would we have to replace it? So around the question of agricultural residues, so so there was a couple of lab studies done by Gary Feiereisen at the USDA. And he found that agricultural residues do release more carbon, so they do stimulate higher nitrogen removal in colder temperatures, which is a good indication for us. But on the flip side, they do have lower hydraulic conductivity, and they may degrade faster. So what we wanted to do was look at well agricultural residues work in a field setting. So we did set up some quick kind of column studies to look at different materials. So we set up hemp, barley straw, and wood shavings. So we decided to use hemp because it is a very fibrous material, and it in theory is more resistant to degradation and decomposition than say other agricultural residues like a barley or a wheat straw. And then we compared that to wood shavings. So in that study, what we found, excuse this diagram, it's busy, but the take-home message here is that the agricultural residues, the hemp and barley, removed about 4 times more nitrogen than the wood did. So we're confirming that agricultural residues do have a really good performance with respect to nitrate removal. So from that information, then we decided to go for a replicated pilot scale design. And this is where we sought and acquired funding from Alberta Innovates, and to have replicated, controlled systems that we could put out into the environment and look at the field performance of agricultural residues at varying hydraulic retention times, so we can figure out how best to promote these systems in the area. So this is a very crude conceptual diagram of what our pilot scale bioreactors look like. And again, these are not high-tech systems. It's basically a trench filled with some organic material, and then it has about 1 foot of a soil cap. And then we put the water through it, and it just, by nature of biological activity within that organic matrix, it converts the nitrate to a gaseous form. So this is our area up just north of Edmonton at the Crop Diversification Center. So we have 9 systems there, and within those 9, we have 3 different feedstocks that we're trialing: wood, barley, hemp, and 3 different retention times at 4, 8, and 12 hours. And that's just how long the water takes to go from the inlet to the outlet end. Then we have 2 locations, one in just north of Edmonton and one down south. And what we're doing, because this is, we wanted these to be controlled. These aren't attached to the end of drainage lines, so we do have full control over the flow rate. But what we had to do was basically simulate subsurface drainage water. So we're just supplementing the water we pulled from either a creek or an irrigation canal with nitrate at about 20 milligrams per liter. I just very briefly want to go through the implications of this, or what hydraulic retention time is basically just the volume of pore space, or the volume of the reactor divided by the flow rate, and that's our hydraulic retention time. So for our pilot systems, all of the bioreactors, as you probably saw, were about the same size. And if we wanted to control the retention time, we have to control the flow rate. So we do have a flow rate adjustment here. It's a little bit different from a field installation because you don't control the flow rate. The flow rate is basically a product of the area of land and precipitation conditions and groundwater conditions. So if we have a target retention time, then we can calculate the pore volume. Pore volume then is just a function of the trench size and the feedstock porosity. So there's a bit of a trade-off between retention time and trench size. So the longer you want your water to be in there, the bigger the trench has to be, and which amplifies the costs. Okay, so another conceptual diagram. Again, this is the Edmonton site. So we just take water in from the creek, supplement with nitrate, and then we control the water at the inlet and measure the change in concentrations. So this is a 3-year project. So the first year, 2019, was just constructing the bioreactors. We've gone through, so how we've broken this up is into seasonal assessments. So we wanted to really look at the cold versus warm weather performance of this material and the retention times. So we had a spring assessment, which is in kind of April, May. Our summer, which is just completed, was last week. So it's kind of July, August, and then in the fall, kind of post-harvest type conditions. So we've very recently completed our summer, but I'm just very quickly going to go through some of our spring 2020 results, looking at nutrient removal performance and hydraulic properties. So what this graphic is showing is the % reduction in nitrate. And I've broken it down into barley versus hemp versus wood. And what we can see is that the agricultural residues kind of range from about 50 to about 90% removal, depending on their hydraulic retention time, which is greatly higher than what we observe for wood. So we are seeing that the agricultural residues do have a much greater performance with respect to nutrient removal than our wood. And I also wanted to show there is a difference between the sites. So in our CDC North, which is in kind of the pinkish color here, we did observe more or a higher percentage removal than our southern site. And we're really largely attributing that to dissolved carbon, both primarily within the source water itself. So the more we supplement the system with carbon, the greater removal that we get, right? And there is a noticeable trend. It's more obvious at the northern site that the barley and the hemp do emit more carbon, so the concentrations are higher than the equivalent for wood. So that could be one of the driving factors for the better performance within the residues. In terms of physical properties, what's really going to be important is looking at how they change over time. But I just wanted to show here that in terms of hydraulic conductivity, what we saw in terms of a trend was that barley was a little bit lower than the wood, but the hemp, the really fibrous material, was fairly equivalent to wood. So I don't think we're having too much of an issue with using agricultural residues, at least initially, but we'll see if there's a reduction in the flow rate as we go along through the experiment. I'm just going to briefly go over this, but it's so what we're also doing is tracer studies just to look at how solutes flow through that material. And all I really wanted to demonstrate here was that these systems kind of tend to behave differently between the north and the south. So whereas the northern sites, the barley and the hemp had more short circuiting than the wood, it was the inverse in the southern site. So what we're seeing is that this is likely the way that the material was packed during construction can affect the hydraulic properties. That's all I wanted to show there. So the takeaway so far, we do have demonstrated good nitrate removal in these systems. Agricultural residues are doing very well. Carbon is an important factor here. And then we do have some indication that the hydraulic properties tend to be affected by how these bioreactors are installed. But more importantly, we want to look at how things change over time. So that's basically what we're doing. And I was asked to go over briefly what the process would be to kind of take this from science to practice. So according to the world, according to Greg here, I really have I think there's the 4 essential elements for translating, soil and water conservation practices from science to the agricultural community, being, awareness and acceptance. So these are more on the end user side of things. Then there's also information and support. So those are kind of the knowledge brokers and being either provincial or municipal extension staff and support through various programs. So with awareness, that's not awareness of just the management practice, but also an awareness of the impacts of, say, in this circumstance, drainage. So environmentally, operationally, and also socially, right? So and by that I mean, if people are draining and it's affecting their downstream users, or downstream producers, then there are social issues that arise from there too. And then, of course, what practices actually work and how much do they cost? Beyond just a knowledge of what is out there, there's definitely a gradient of acceptance. I think the more complicated that these practices are, the less likely they are to be taken up. And I'm speaking in generalities here. I mean, literally, there's tens of thousands of actors out there with that run the whole spectrum of sophistication and risk tolerances. But in general, the simpler the system, the more likely it is to be taken up. And if it's kind of low tech or inexpensive, it's more likely to be accepted. And again, this is for soil and water conservation practices. When it comes to production, I think there's more of a tolerance to accept more higher tech solutions. But in these circumstances, if it's easier, it's cheaper, and it works, then it's more likely to be taken up. So then from where we come in is more on the information side. So we can help with providing information of how to plan these systems, or where they should go on a site, how to go about estimating the flow, which is important for designing these systems, and what is useful in terms of a target retention time, or what feedstock material would actually work, and then the costs and benefits, of course. And then what supports are available are also important. So support in terms of design, but also if there's cost offsets and regulatory support as well. So a lot of drainage applications, you do require a approval through the Water Act. So if this is an accepted management practice, then perhaps that can facilitate approval for a drainage project if they can demonstrate that they're committing to a conservation practice. Okay, just wanted to really wrap this up very briefly. So one of the best tools that we have in our arsenal for improving the awareness and acceptance of a practice is really just demonstration projects. So what we've done off the heels of this work was kind of a spin-off, and really looking at whether or not these systems would work for surface runoff treatment systems as well. So I just wanted to indicate here that surface runoff is a little bit different. There not only does it have nitrogen, it also has phosphorus, and it also has sediment, which are challenges that could be and opportunities that could be put together with the bioreactor concept. So what we have is this farmyard with a bit of a livestock operation there, and a drainage way that goes into a catch basin, and then which is right adjacent to an irrigation canal. So they're very interested in managing the nutrients here. So to deal with the sediment, we've introduced a roughing filter, and to deal with the phosphorus, we're using a phosphorus removal structure. So this is kind of a 3-phase demonstration that we're doing. So we have the roughing filter, which has gravel in it. Bioreactor, we're using flax straw, which is very similar to hemp. And then the phosphorus filter has steel slag. And this is the best picture I have most recently of last week of where we are in the construction. But once this is done, then the producers, of course, they can get a better understanding of what's happening. They can talk to their colleagues and peers, and then the county can also make use of that site just to show people what the concept is and how to best do it or put it into practice. So I'll acknowledge here the funding that we've received from Alberta Innovates and the Canadian Agricultural Partnership and its predecessor of Growing Forward 2, and also our partners with the Taber Irrigation District and the County of Warner with our latest demonstration site. And at that time, so I'll just take any questions before we move on. So I'm just looking at the Q&A, and I do notice that there's a question here about, is canola a good substrate for bioreactors? I'll admit I don't know, but I don't see why not. As long as it's a good high carbon substrate, it would in theory remove nitrogen in this type of environment. To my knowledge, canola has I haven't seen it tested in the literature, but where it would fall on the spectrum of durability, I guess, would be a question. Because from our preliminary work and some of the work in the literature, cereal straws like barley and wheat don't tend to hold up for very long, whereas wood might last for anywhere from 15 to 20 years. You might get 4 or 5 with a cereal straw. We're very interested in hemp and flax straw because they are a very fibrous material. I just don't know offhand the composition of a canola straw to say whether they would degrade quickly or be a little more resilient.
Hey, Greg, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think what we'll prefer to do is hold the questions till the end. So I'm going to pass it over to Zach. But before I do, I'll just remind those in the audience to submit your questions in the Q&A, and we'll have certainly time at the end for all the presenters. And I just have a little issue with my mic that's more than just can Brett push the red button and unpush it. And so I have to do something in the background and reset my mic every time I hit mute. So it might take a little bit while to get in at the very end, but I'll try to moderate the Q&A, but I'll probably keep my mic open at that point rather than using the mute as we traditionally would. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to the last session. So I'll introduce Zach. Zach will be speaking on his project, Sustainable Sunlight Treatment for Accelerated Oil Sands Process Affected Water Remediation. So Zach, over to you. And do we have a sound check issue? Because I can't hear Zach right now.
Can you hear me now?
10-4. Yeah, you're coming through.
Okay. Perfect. Speaking of pressing the red button, missed doing that. All right. So thanks for the introduction, Brett, and for a good lead-in from Howie and Greg. So today I'd like to provide a brief introduction to HTNO, our startup on treatment in Canada's oil sands, as well as some other wastewater treatment and remediation applications, and tell you a little bit about our technology and talk about one of the processes project in which we're grateful to have the support of Alberta Innovates to be developing and assessing our technology in the field. So as a brief introduction to our company, we're based in Kitchener, Ontario, but we have operations in Ontario and Alberta. We're Canadian founded and started and a spinoff from university. Research project that started off with the genesis of studying applying a new treatment tool to treating oil sands process affected water, and has since spun off into this business. And so what HTNO is focused on is developing new sustainable and economical solutions for managing water and remediation treatment applications, both in sort of a conventional remediation setting, say in energy, metals mining, and contaminated sites, as well as some other industrial wastewater, and eventually working towards some application in water supply as well. One of the gaps that we're looking to solve, and the area our focus is in the water treatment chain, is what's called advanced oxidation. So getting rid of some of the hardest to treat organics and other targets for oxidation that exist in the water treatment train. And so typically speaking, our process is a component of the process and is specifically focused on some of those targets that need to be oxidized to be removed. Everything that could be from petrochemical refining to pharmaceutical compounds and so on that would otherwise be persistent or hard to degrade. So conventionally, this can be done through chemical oxidation, although conventionally that's a relatively intensive process, a lot of chemical input to do that treatment. And though it's capable of treating those compounds, for some settings, it's just not an appropriate technology on a cost and operational intensity basis. Besides, there's biological treatment processes, which are generally more passive and low input. But conversely, there are these compounds that are difficult to biodegrade, maybe actually biotoxic themselves. And so a marriage of those two different technologies, having the chemical oxidation power, but the scalability and passivity of a biological treatment process, was something that we identified as a gap that could be addressed using a process called photocatalysis. And so H2 Nano developed a platform that we call Solar Pass. It's a passive oxidation process that brings the same chemical advanced oxidation that would be conventionally applied in those systems, but a form factor that is sunlight activated, can operate off-grid, and is a passive and low input process that gives us the kind of treatment power we're looking for at a much lower operational intensity. So a brief introduction slide here on how Solar Pass works. We're perhaps less familiar with advanced oxidation and photocatalysis. So the way that our technology operates is we deploy a proprietary material into water. That material uses sunlight as its energy source, sort of the same way as you'd see with a solar cell, but instead of a electrical process, we're generating chemicals in situ. And so those chemicals are made out of the water itself that then go on to treat and degrade contaminants that we're looking to destroy. So in this case, but that's a process then that is a continuous loop. It's not consuming any chemicals in the process. Our particles are just facilitating reactions. So you can think of them as like small chemical factories in the water that are using sunlight as their energy source. So that gives us a high strength treatment, but it does so in a passive and sustainable way. One slide too quick there. And so one of the other things that we integrated into this proprietary material is the ability to float the materials to the surface and forming a film that gets the maximum amount of sunlight input. It can be deployed into a number of different water bodies, so either constructed systems or existing holding ponds. And so the premise here is that at the surface of the water where sunlight intensity is strongest, we can facilitate that reaction, mix the particles through to interact with the contaminants, and then at the end of the process, be able to recover them either for reuse or ultimate turn down of the treatment system, making sure that we're leaving nothing behind. There's no waste generated, and this process is able to do that as adding our materials, operating with exposure to sunlight, and then recovering them back out at the end of the process. So the pathway in which we took to get to this stage, and this is where I'll turn our focus to the example commercialization process that we're going through in a technology development that we're in a stage of right now. Earlier in 2013 to 2015 was where some of the initial research at the University of Waterloo and University of Toronto occurred. Through that process to demonstrate a concept on an example oil sands process affected water to show that chemically speaking, we were able to degrade some of the contaminants of concern, in this case, acid extractable organics, as they're called, or naphthenic acids. And after that, we're able to submit to COSIA, so the Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, a proposal for examining this further as a new technology to apply for this passive organics treatment, and a problem statement that they had put out. Through that process, we went through a few more stages of demonstrating it, and we're fortunate to have 5 of the operators completing surface mining in COSIA join a joint project with H2 Nano, and from there completed a series of demonstration trials, starting with a process that we completed in an indoor setting where we used artificial sunlight at about a 200-liter scale. Then later in 2018, we were able to deploy a system that operated outdoors using sunlight at about a 600 liter scale, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. We studied 3 different oil sands process affected water samples to show the repeatability of the process. And from there, scaled that up to our present stage, which is working on a larger scale pilot and the scale up potential of the technology and in-field demonstration, and continuing to optimize and examine how we can bring that process to an appreciably solve the problem. So the images here are from our 2018 demonstration, and so just giving a window into what the scale-up process looks like. So we've gone from beaker scale to an indoor tub under some UV lamps to this being about a 600 liter demonstration study, 2 parallel reactors able to study the treatment versus control, and do so on 3 different OSPW sources. You can see on the left some images there that I've shown the catalyst as it floats on the surface of the water. In our mixing process there, which we're using a low-power paddle wheel mixing to gently move and bring the contaminant to the surface where it is treated. And you can see it in the bottom right there. It's sort of an example of what that flotation process looks like for our treatment material. And so that gives us the benefit of being able to be ready sunlight intensity is strongest, but also be able to mix through the water well, distribute across the surface, and conduct that treatment. So we were fortunate through that demonstration to see some really great results on all 3 of the waters we treated. This slide shows an example of one of those partners' waters that we treated. And this is where we were able to demonstrate that under a couple days of sunlight, which conveniently in an area where we were seeing is quite similar to the typical sunlight exposure and intensity in Alberta as well, that we were able to eliminate measured toxicity on rainbow trout and fathead minnow bioassays, which are 2 of the standard assays that are used for evaluating the water quality. And through that process, we're able to eliminate toxicity without necessarily fully degrading or eliminating those acid extractable organics and naphthenic acids. So we've been able to show that the treatment both targets the particular species that are generating that toxicity, as well as being able to do that treatment in a quick way, doing that in a couple of days of treatment, a fast time scale than would otherwise be observed through natural degradation or some of the other biological processes that would be using a similar natural sunlight and energy source. And so we're really heartened by this example, gave us some great demonstration data to be able to show that we could repeat this on others in a similar way. And we're able to do that through the partnership with those COSIA partners at this scale. And so we used that then to launch up to a larger scale demonstration, and this year just showing that repeatability. So in under a couple of days, we could get rid of the toxicity measured on those 2 fish assays. We're able to leverage that up as well into some other studies that we completed at that stage, particularly towards examining some of the ways that we could better quantify this effect and understand other technologies that could be integrated as we built a more complete treatment and monitoring system. One of those, which just featuring here, is a Biomimetic System that we were studying in partnership with Imperial and ExxonMobil, and credit to the ExxonMobil team for having developed this system. Was able to examine and correlate well with our measured biotoxicity result. Using a chemical analysis tool, this biomimetic extraction device that was able to detect some of the compounds in the water toxicity and being able to measure them dropping off process for treatment as well. So being able to use these demonstration stages to better understand and develop those tools really gives us an interesting tool set to be able to examine the end-to-end treatment process here and go from proof of concept to something that's starting to look a little bit more like a complete package that we'd be able to operate well in the field. So as I mentioned, we're going through a stage of a number of scale-ups of this process. We have a very large potential end application for it, but there's, as Howie had mentioned, a number of stage gating processes to be able to show how we can take this from the idea and prototype stage to something that is really showing its capability to operate at scale and reliably. And so I'll mention a brief window into some of the results we've had from the sort of referring to as the mobile reactor, or our demonstration system that's currently operating in Alberta, and is showing this technology at a larger scale, so going from about 1 ton per day of treatment up to greater than 10 tons per day through this system. And so you can see that pictured here, a solar pass pilot that we deployed last year, and that was conducting treatment as well on oil sands process affected water, and examining for the same kind of treatment objective, being able to apply a short treatment using H2 Nano's solar pass technology to eliminate some of the measured rainbow trout and fathead minnow toxicity in the water. So this took us to a larger scale here. We have a mobile system that we've packaged into a treatment plant here, and these outdoor reactors that collect the sunlight the same way, operate and conduct an optimized mixing process for our treatment compound, and are able to give a similar result, which we're able to show here in a snapshot that as well, in a treatment of a couple days of UV exposure from the sun, we were able to show a same kind of removal of fathead minnow toxicity and growth inhibition in the water through this process. So really excited by that result and being able to show that through a order of magnitude increase in operable scale, and being able to show this as a more representative process end-to-end in terms of addition of the water treatment and recovery of the material, that we could get that treated water out and find the result that we were looking for. And so all of this has been a great opportunity for us to take this concept and technology that I can still being in here on a benchtop several years ago to something that is looking more and more each day like an industrial process and showing that reliability and capability for a new technology to solve a problem here. And so just in summary, over the course of this pilot development and what this stage towards a commercial development looks like, that we've been able to take things from over 5 days of exposure, optimized and tuned the technology to get us down to 1 to 2 days of treatment for removing some of the measured toxicity. Being able to get that from an initial demonstration source up to 5 different sources of OSPW that we've been able to demonstrate on, and taking that up to a much larger scale and move from artificial benchtop conditions to something that is an outdoor process with the variability of weather, come rain or sunshine, and able to show that we're able to demonstrate this process. So means, and near the finish line here, we still have a lot of hurdles and growth to go, but showing that through some deliberate processes and taking this through a number of gates, we've been able to show the technology's growth and capabilities. So in the final couple minutes here, I'll just talk a little bit about where we see this headed and sort of the broader implications of the technology. So when we started developing Solar Pass, we had an idea of being able to deploy this system into large outdoor treatment processes that could use passive or semi-passive processes to deliver the treatment result required. So as you've seen here, we've been principally talking about this open channel system that I'm mentioning at the top here. The image that we have here is a point of reference of a full scale, would be similar to algae biofuels production and using large outdoor raceway ponds to generate biofuels. And in this case, you would use a similar form factor and what we've been modeling this after with our bacteria material process to do that remediation on a variety of waters. In this case, a study on OSPW, as well as being able to deploy that into existing ponds holding systems, where we could do an in situ treatment of the whole water body, or a continuous maintenance of that water quality through processes using in-pond containment booms and structures that would be able to deploy the material, conduct treatment over a season, and be able to recover and service that continue using our processes. And so the idea here is giving this platform that in the least energy intensive and operator intensive form factor that we can deliver that advanced oxidation treatment power, and in a manner that is sustainable, is not generating waste, and can do so in a predictable way. And so we're continuing to look for expanded applications of this in and out of Alberta, and through Alberta Innovates is developing some of the further refinement and scale up of this technology as we do the next successive stages of getting this towards a full scale. And some of those applications, for those on the call who may not be in Canada's oil sands or doing specifically oil and mining process water management, We are taking a look at some of the expanded applications of this as well, where that same high strength treatment is required, but conventional treatment processes may not be either economical or scalable to that particular setting. So being able to examine that in a variety of site remediation and large-scale water treatment processes, as well as examining its application in industrial wastewater applications, be that pulp and paper or some agriculture and aquaculture settings that show some potential and need for an advanced oxidation process. And downstream, also looking, for those of you who've got a cup of water, being able to examine its application for treating emerging contaminants, be those pharmaceutical compounds or enabling us to be more sustainable in water reuse downstream, where advanced oxidation will eventually and is a growing component of our drinking water processes as well, and working to integrate H2 Nano into being a component of those treatment systems as well. So just wanted to finish off by acknowledging and thanking the small army of support that we have behind getting us to this stage and what I've been able to share with you today. So to our joint industry project members from COSIA, our thanks for taking an interest in this technology and us up to this point and continuing, as well as university supports that we've had as well. Alberta Innovates and STTC, and then a number of other incubator and funding and research partners that we've been able to have supported this process in and out of Alberta to be able to develop and advance this technology. But yeah, I think that should be all that I have to share for now, and we'll maybe pass it over for some questions. Brett, I think you might be silent.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you now.
Okay, I'm on mic number 3 here right now since we started here. So, all right. Anyway, thanks, Zach. I appreciate that. So thanks, everyone, for the presentation. What I'd like to do now is move through questions. So I'll remind the audience if they can insert some questions into the Q&A, and I'll moderate those and sort of pass them off to the individual speakers. And so I'm not going to just do it in a sort of pure linear fashion, but to kick things off, I'm going to go back to Howie right off the start here. So Howie, I'm going to pass to your way, and I'm going to start with one of your opening comments that you had, and then there was a question that came in. And so let's see, I'm going to push to the slide area, and so you can see this. And so the question is, were the concerns of your clients all about technical risk, or did they have other worries that stood in the way of adoption, like regulatory risk, finances, or anything like that? Wondering if you could just comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess 2 or 3 years ago, when we were a laboratory-based experiment, there were technical risks for sure. Some of the chemical handling, without going into the details, was considered to be a risk in the sense that it was an unknown and people didn't know if it could be addressed on an industrial scale. While we had confidence it could be, that isn't enough evidence. Having moved through the progress, and it's interesting listening to Zach's talk, we the same sort of stage-gated process to a full field trial. Once we completed the full field trial, the technical risk, I think, is essentially eliminated. And I think most people would agree with that who we're talking with. The big risk now is does this have the long-term financial benefit that we project that it has? And I think that's where, so our risk is, I guess the answer to the question is, the risk has evolved over time, moving from a technical risk, eliminating that, and now to a business risk.
Okay, thanks, Howie. So I'm just going to pass one other question your way. And so when you say clean water, how clean are we talking about here? Is it reusable on an industrial level, or can it be used for farming, agriculture, or the drinking water level? So can you just comment on that? You mentioned the sort of salt content, but anything else would be useful.
Yeah, so absolutely. So we can achieve potable levels of quality. Now, I want to be clear, just for the audience, that's what the science says. We're not an approved. I'm not stating that from a regulatory and an approved process viewpoint, but I'm saying that from we can demonstrate that the exiting clean water can reach potable quality. So it's certainly going to be more than adequate for industrial reuse, which is what we're targeting first because the bar is lower. But ultimately, we see this being able to address agricultural reuse or agricultural discharge or surface discharge in general. That's just sort of part of what's inherent in our process.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Howie. Going to move over to Greg for a couple of questions now. Greg, can you comment on, can you use this type of bioreactor to remove selenium?
Yes, of course, selenium is more of an issue in the mining sector than agricultural, but virtually anything that is more mobile in its oxidized form and you want to remove it via biogeochemical conversion to its reduced form can be removed through this type of technology. So selenium, from my understanding, is kind of lower down on the food chain with respect to biogeochemical processing, whereas nitrate is basically just so what happens is the bacteria degrade organic material and then they're looking for an electron receptor. So there's oxygen is the primary one. Just under oxygen is nitrate. So it's actually doesn't take much of a depreciation in the kind of electron or electric potential for it to get knocked down and for that to get reduced to nitrogen gas. So things like selenium and sulfate are further down and just require a much more anoxic and reducing environment. So I'm quite certain that it could be done. I don't know all of the details around how it would be applied to selenium, but I imagine it would take a much longer retention time than the bioreactors for removing nitrate. So that would be one condition. And of course, the retention time, because it would be longer, it'd be a much bigger system. So it would have to be designed a little bit differently.
Okay, thank you. So another question, is canola straw a good substrate for bioreactors?
Yeah, I already jumped the gun on this question, but in summary, yes, I believe it would be. But whether it's the best option for an edge of field bioreactor, I think would take some investigation. I just don't know offhand whether how fibrous the material is and whether it be considered more of like a cereal straw, which degrade really quickly, or if it would be a little more durable, like a hemp or flax. But if it's a high carbon material, it could be used.
Okay, thanks. So I'll pass one more question here and then move over to Zach. So when you say carbon, do you mean DOC or organic dissolved carbon, or does it include inorganic?
Yeah, so apologies for missing that. It is the DOC. So with nitrification is a heterotrophic, or sorry, denitrification is a heterotrophic process. So they are using organic carbon for their energy production, and then the nitrate, of course, is just accepting that electron. So the DOC is what I mean, and that's what's really driving the changes in removal performance that we're seeing.
Okay, I'm going to move over to Zach for a few questions. So Zach, are there seasonal constraints for using solar pass?
Yeah, it depends on what latitude you're at, of course. But generally speaking, for this application, we're examining sort of the treatment season from when the water starts flowing to when it stops, as far as winter and cold conditions. Theoretically, it would, if there was flowing water, it would still treat throughout the year with the presence of the sunlight. It just changes the relative throughput of the system, where we're, as you would have seen in some of my figures there, measuring on sort of an accumulated UV dose. So where you have lower UV intensity or lower number of hours of sunlight a day, it would affect the overall throughput of the system, though we find that process is pretty well aligned with the received UV, and so it turn up and turn down appropriately. And in fact, that's a part of our process design as well, as being able to monitor, predict, and confirm the requisite dose of UV as we go through the process on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and seasonal basis.
Okay, thanks. Question here, are there peer-reviewed papers on your 2019 trials, or any in the works? And are you putting pen to paper right now on those, if not?
Yeah, I'm not the lead author on those, but yeah, I can point to a couple. In fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to just push up our references slide here, Brett. So there's a couple papers by my colleague Tim Leshuk that are listed there that would be the first ones to draw your attention to in terms of some initial results and reporting. And we have presented some of these results at a couple of the COSIA conferences as well. We do expect to have some more publications forthcoming, just to complete some of those studies and rounding out the data analysis. So you can keep a lookout from those papers coming from Tim and Frank as far as what would be next to report those results. Okay.
Thanks, and I'll remind everyone, if they couldn't jot that down, that there will be a we're saving the presentation and the materials on the internet, and they'll be posted to our website after, so you can come back and look for those resources. So the next question, what is the effluent, or the residual effluent naphthenic acids in your field study? And there's reference to using FTIR as an example, sort of for for measurement purposes.
Yeah, that's a great question, and yeah, FTIR being sort of the conventional way of identifying the acid extractable organics, at least in that fraction. We've been able to examine both that and the naphthenic acids by mass spectrometry. We can, and we've shown actually one of the papers I referenced there, fully degrade that acid extractable organics to below 1 ppm with sufficient treatment extent. The interesting thing I'll draw your attention to is that we found, at least for the toxicity results in the examination on rainbow trout and fathead minnow, a partial treatment of those compounds is all that's necessary to convert those naphthenic acids to things that are not causing toxicity and more bioavailable through that process. And so I didn't get into the technical weeds today, but if you check out some of our publications there too, we've done a full fraction analysis through high spectroscopy or high resolution mass spectroscopy to be able to examine the relative appearance and appearance of species too. So lots to chew on there if that's an interest to you.
Okay, just pushing a longer slide for you, Zach, here. I'll let you read it, but I'll say it out as well. So I noticed on your slides that you have moved successfully from university research to a company looking to scale its production and business model. So how important is it to have the support of an accelerator like CDL or Creative Destruction Labs with the business planning model that they provide for you, keeping in mind that the end users are COSIA, as an example? So.
Yeah, so definitely those accelerators, and in addition to CDL Velocity, so the University of Waterloo's linked accelerator, we've been based for a number of years, are all really helpful programs. You know, I humbly submit that our training and expertise is engineering and science. Developing the better business know-how, and that is something that's been it's sort of a lived MBA of sorts. So. Absolutely, having those supports has been important, and I would encourage those starting a similar path to find an accelerator or an incubator that are well adjusted to your area of interest and what you're working on. And yeah, speaking to COSIA, they've obviously been an instrumental partner of this even before. You know, we were being able to look at this at a larger scale at just the research level in a lab, and providing that inspiration behind where to apply some of the technology we had developed for using photocatalysts and our composite materials. So, you know, from the very early stage up till now, you know, they've been a huge support. And I think we still have a way to go, but at least as a positive indication of the kind of thing that can come from COSIA's ETAP program, and being able to pull out some promising things from the research stage and start to look at them at a bigger scale.
Okay, thanks. So there was a sort of final part to this question, and you certainly touched on some of this in the story that you told from the early ideation through the scale-up processes and the potential for both the application that you're primarily looking at and some potential alternatives. But can you sort of maybe make a further comment on that link between IP, what you've sort of publicly published to date, and results that you're thinking of commercializing?
Yeah, absolutely. And those are great questions. I mean, maybe taking that question from the backward side in, as far as key results in publishing, I think that's been an important hallmark of representing the quality of data and mentioned they're made of peer-reviewed papers. I mean, that provides a background to say that the science we're talking about is stuff that is understood and agreed not only by us and our customer, but the broader science community. So I think that's been a real strength of development process. As far as IP, I mean, we've developed a portfolio of IP around both the composite materials and their development and what's gone into sort of the background and baseline of that technology, as well as through this process inherently know-how surrounding how to operate and conduct photocatalytic treatment in this manner. So there's a variety of different IP that have come out of that. We've been fortunate through the University of Waterloo's IP policy to have that be something that we could put into the vessel of a company and work on commercializing quite readily. And so having support from the universities on that commercialization pathway has been pretty important too, and something that shouldn't be discounted as part of that process.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Zach. I'm just going to move to another question and move this back to Greg here. A couple questions still remaining here for Greg. So, Greg, have you considered whether treating the materials using a sort of biochar process to sort of change the behavior of it, and whether that can enhance some of the treatment outcomes?
Yeah, we did consider, just in a previous iteration of this type of project, of using biochar, but it'd be more effective as a kind of just like it's more of an inert substrate. So biochar is the process of when you pyrolyze biomass to get like a biofuel from it. Biochar is just the byproduct, so it is fairly inert. So you transition from a biological process to basically a physical chemical process. So it would require, it's more of like a sorption-based system. So biochar in and of itself is a really good sorbent for more organic chemicals, but they can be modified to have a charge, so then they could hold on to like inorganic nutrients. But for the sake of getting back to the simplicity factor for a lot of soil water conservation practices, just having a biological system with relatively fresh residue that they could pull off their field and put into a trench is probably the preferred way to go in this iteration anyway, because it is a lot more simpler and direct.
Okay, and I was wondering if you could just comment on sort of the need for sort of timeframe for an approval process for installations of the reactors.
The timeline it virtually would be around approval for, say, a drainage project. If this is being added onto something that's proposed, if it's a retrofit to an existing drainage project. I'm not 100% that it would actually require an approval, but I don't want to step into those waters. I'm not certain. A timeline around a Water Act application is really dependent on how busy they are. It could take a matter of a few months to, in really complicated scenarios, up to about a year. So that's not a good answer, but a wide range of process of time.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I'm going to move back to Zach for a couple questions here. So Zach, any comments on ammonia production during oxidation of the organics and what the secondary products that might be formed during that oxidation process?
Yeah, ammonia is something we can certainly treat, or if it were present in the water, would be a candidate for oxidation as well. Insofar as that, are there NOx compounds formed as part of the reaction pathway? They may be, particularly for some of those compounds, NOx, SOx compounds. There's a pretty deep number of pathways that oxidation process goes through, and I won't pretend to say that I have an exact know-how that'll be in every water matrix off the top of my head, but yeah, it can be oxidized, and what I will comment on is for most of those compounds that we're oxidizing there, it would be able to be, fully degraded if it were treated to the fullest extent. So in terms of concerns about reaction intermediates there, that process isn't limited to a certain degree of oxidation there, so it should be able to proceed right through.
Okay. Question, whether you've sort of tested for the presence of pHs in the system when you've been doing the trials, and whether there's any potential for oxidation and reduction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely applicable there as well. In fact, there are aromatic rings that we're treating in the naphthenic acids themselves. So yeah, pHs are certainly addressable by a photocatalytic AOP. In fact, one of the things that can maybe be of interest to people as well that are in the chemistry inside is that we're generating a mix of oxidants, so not only hydroxyl radicals, but also superoxide radicals from dissolved oxygen in the water. So there actually are some reaction pathways that are particularly well suited to this application. And so absolutely treatable, yeah.
Okay, one last question while we're talking about the periodic table. So have you tested for the presence of bromide or bromate in the system?
Yeah, in some of our applications, I know that'd be a question from, doing some oxidation treatment there to convert it. I'd have to ask you to follow up with me on that. I don't have as much knowledge of what we have or haven't tested in that realm and on what samples, but at least as far as testing for it, and we're aware of that in some of the samples we're treating. So.
Okay, I think I have one last question from the audience here, and again for you, Zach, just to comment on the ease of installation and maintenance for the operations.
Yeah, so it depends, of course, on what we're talking about. For the installation of the mobile reactor pilot that we had there, that was crane in, hook up some hoses, and we're off to the races. So it was relatively easy and designed to be a easily movable and operable unit. So credit to our engineers on that one. In terms of deployment into a pond setting or some of those other realms, much of it is simply deploying the catalyst into the requisite containment or system, and to the scaling up question here, what that's going to look like for a larger scale operation is contingent on what the treatment receiving body looks like. So if it's in an existing pond or something, it may be quite quick. If we're designing, more permanent systems that are installed, there may be a bit more time for the civil infrastructure to be set up. But relatively speaking, it's quite quick, and the instrumentation is relatively modular as well.
Okay, and so if you can see the one that I just sort of pushed, which is, I think you started to touch on this, but can you open the curtains a little bit on what you think the next step is in terms of bigger scale deployment?
Yeah, I think the big question here is basically that. Are we, moving through different steps of being able to show scaling up, so larger volumes of treatment over more extended period of time, seasonality? Through some of those studies, as part of that program, we've set it with our partners, and those steps are really, as Howie had commented on, for any water technology at this stage, is showing resiliency and repeatability of that process. Since it has to be dead to rights to be something that's adopted in such an important setting such as that one. So.
Okay. Yeah. No. Thanks very much. Maybe just a couple wrap-up comments for me. Certainly. Thanks, Greg, Howie, Zach, for great presentations, and the Q&A that has come after. Comment certainly from all three all three presenters, the technology that you work in, the interaction that we've had with you. Certainly appreciate that we saw very early on and through the process in terms of deployment and project management, just the interest you all have in looking at a fairly strong foundation of metrics to look at success for your technologies, both in terms of improved environmental performance, a focus on providing some key KPIs for your technology in terms of water, whether it's conservation, efficiency, productivity, toxicity reduction, and then to tie into that both a ease of use and deployment, and then evidence of economic performance as well, so that it can compete against other technologies. So appreciate both the stories that you provided and the potential outlook for deployment in the future. So certainly thanks to you for that. Thanks to the audience for sticking around and participating in today's event. Just a reminder that we do record these sessions, and we do post them online, so you can come back and revisit if there was anything in particular that you want to hear again, or some points that you wanted to take away that you didn't quite catch during the presentations. We will be sending out a short survey after the session, and your feedback will certainly help us provide quality content as we move forward. So this was a transition for us from moving from in-person forums that we typically had in one or more venues on an annual basis to an online system, and we'll probably continue to use this in one way or another, even when things return back to our ability to meet in person again. So with that, I'll also point out that our next session on community-based community-based monitoring and public outreach, it'll be held on September 16th. And the full schedule for our sessions can be found by clicking on the schedule button at the top right corner of your screen. And so we certainly look forward to meeting you all again soon. And with that, please enjoy and have a safe rest of the day, and we'll hope to connect with you all again later.